Welcome back everyone to Data Science for Everyone. Today we're going to be talking about literature reviews. Let's get started. So to start off, let's kind of talk about why we actually do literature reviews in the first place. So we want to clarify our own research aims. We want to provide depth and breadth of the subject knowledge material. We want to form theoretical frameworks for our own empirical investigations, and we want to contribute to our research design. Now, the literature review process has several parts to it. Okay, first we have information seeking and retrieval, and this is the ability to search appropriate sources and scan the literature efficiently, using manual or online methods to identify and obtain a set of useful articles, chapters, and books. Second, we have evaluation, the ability to judge a source based on a number of criteria, including the source itself, the author, and the subject. Critical analysis, the ability to examine and analyze the content of the literature systematically. Research synthesis, the ability to synthesize the various concepts and evidence you have found into a structured piece of discursive prose that provides context and background on your topic area. Information search and retrieval. Now let's get a little bit more in depth into what information search and retrieval is. So when we're planning a search on any topic area, it is important for us to be familiar with the tertiary sources, so the bibliographies of the bibliographies, and which we will help to identify the secondary sources, such as other bibliographies, index, and abstracts. This will be very useful when you will want to lead to our primary sources for our review. So we want to formulate a strategy for our research, and this is to begin a very easy framework, a research question maybe, or even allow the question to guide your initial search. Now we need to remember that a literature review is there to allow us to formulate our research question more precisely. It is highly probable that we're become increasingly more knowledgeable the more focus that we have on our research, and our research focus definitely and most likely will shift as we go through the literature. Let's define the search, define our search objectives. So state clearly the research question or questions that you have, determining why information is needed and how it will ultimately be used. This will help you to formulate boundaries to your search and may also suggest the appropriate search systems. These topics are a starting point, but the researcher's objectives may change as the search progresses. Once you have organized your subject into topic groups, you can then go on to analyze the keywords within that group to make sure that you are using the best possible search terms. Identify keywords, phrases, and subject categories to be used in the search. We need to identify all the possible ways to describe the topic groups. We need to note synonyms, distinctive terms, and alternate spellings. A comprehensive list of all search terms should be maintained and recorded, the success and value of each, in order to avoid unnecessary repetition. When the first useful items are identified, you must examine them for their other keywords and concepts that were not predetermined and carry out a subsequent search to ensure that all of these items and terms are located. Identify and record sources to be accessed in searching for information. So we need to maintain a full record, or as much as possible, of useful sources. We also need to maintain an ongoing log of the search recordings of the bibliographic sources, search terms that we may have used and that we find useful. It is useful to keep a log of our current search, which can also be stored and referred to in subsequent searches and subsequent research. Reinventing the wheel is never a great idea, and we usually don't have time, so we need to keep a log. It is always going to be useful to us, and also use some sort of dedicated software. Evaluation. Once you have carried out the search, it is important that you pause and examine the information that you have retrieved. If you have restricted yourself to refereed journals, books, and so forth, this may not necessarily be a problem, but it does cause some issues. Examine the quality of the sources that you have also identified. There are a number of criteria that we must use to evaluate the quality of the information that we have retrieved. We need to look at the authority, scope, and purpose. The authority, consider the authority of the creators. Who actually made that document, and in order to appraise the reliability of the information. Consider aspects such as the author's previous research, their stature, what organization they're affiliated with, their political stance, their credibility, and their reputation amongst their peers. Publishers are given, publishers should be given consideration when they have a reputation of producing authoritative or high-quality publications. Usually these are the top journals in the field, as well as other more breakout journals. Journal articles are often peer-reviewed before publication, but this is not always the case, and we should make sure to check the information of the editorial policy of the journals to determine the rigor of the review process. It is also worth investigating whether the source you have obtained has been cited by other reputable authors. Scope. Consider what claims are made by the authors of the work. The most reliable pieces of research should set out clear scope, aims, and objectives, and the methods by which the data was collected. Any works which fail to set out such information should, again, be regarded with caution. Purpose. Think about why a work was produced and the reason that was given for the indication of its reliability. If the work was produced at to convince buyers of a value of information resource, it is not necessarily useful for the objective and the independent assessment of the value of the resource. Critical analysis. Every item that we read should inform us about our argument. We should establish the background to and justification for our work. We need to demonstrate and how to deconstruct an argument in order to establish the robustness of that argument. The same technique can be applied in reverse when we are wanting to construct our own arguments. Critical analysis. An academic argument should have a number of components. First, we need a claim, and then second, we need a reason. Any argument should consist of a claim or a conclusion, and a reason or an interpretation of the data, and evidence the data itself, to support that claim and any qualifications of the claim. In order to analyze an argument of the author, we must read the piece and identify all of these components. A claim. A claim is the essence of an argument. It is the conclusion that the writer intends to demonstrate by applying all other components of the argument in support of that claim. A claim should be simple. Before believing any claims, we must know a few things. You would need to know the reason someone had for making the claim, what evidence is provided to support that claim, and how far does the claim go, and specifically, are there any qualifiers? It is not difficult to spot a claim. It is often in the title or the opening paragraph. Once you know the writer's claim, establish how that claim is supported. The reason. Now, there are 3 questions to ask when we are trying to establish the value of a reason. Now, these reasons a writer gives for making a claim are the building blocks of any argument. Reasons comprise the second level of an argument. Without the first level, the claim cannot stand. The argument should cease to be effective without any robust reason, which is usually the writer's interpretation of the evidence or the data. So a couple questions that we need to look at is the reason relevant to the claim it supports? So in order to be relevant to the claim, there has to be a very clear link between the claim and the reasons for making it. Second, is the reason effective? So if a reason is to be effective, it must relate to the value you can believe in or agree with. 3. Is the value invoked by the reason likely to be universal or selective? The value judgments are nearly always subjective. This means that the value judgment of the writer has to agree with the value judgment of the reader. It's always a good idea to restate the value being appealed to as clearly as possible in your own terms. Evidence. So when evidence comes in the form of empirical research data, we must ask ourselves if that data is credible. Where are the statistics gathered from a reliable source, and is there a way to verify it? If we are given qualitative data in the form of opinions, the same questions need to be asked. Where was the data collected? How was it collected? And how did the researcher interpret it? Readers are unlikely to accept a claim based solely on the reasons given by the author. We would expect the author to support their reasons. The most holistic or critical to an audience is the stronger the evidence must be. It must be accurate, credible, and given in sufficient quantity to convince the reader that the author's knowledgeable. Qualifiers. There are two types of claims: the unqualified claim and the qualified claim. When we're reading an article, look for the qualifiers. They're words such like usually, many, most, often, and a few. By far the most common of our qualified claims, whether made by a book critic or a research student or a practitioner, shares the results of their investigation. The majority of their claims or conclusions are qualified in some way or another. This is by no means going to lessen the value of that claim. If anything, it makes it more reliable because the research has acknowledged the potential limitations of the work. Conclusions. Draw conclusions, formulate an argument, and provide framework for synthesis. Once you have analyzed the text, you can then draw your own conclusions from the work and begin to formulate your own arguments. Your review will ultimately provide a synthesis of the articles, research reports, or reviews that you have analyzed. Your conclusions will provide the framework for that synthesis. This exercise is also very useful when writing up your own work. If your writing can stand up to the same level of critical analysis that you can have subjected to your own chosen review items, then you can feel confident that you have presented a robust argument. Marking up the text. So when you're reading through an article, it's always helpful to annotate the text as you go in order to establish which part of the article does what in terms of the overall argument. A claim is identified, and you can use this by underlining the text. A reason is identified by utilizing square brackets. Evidence is identified by utilizing asterisks or stars. Qualifiers can be identified by encircling them with a box. Now again, all of these are just suggestions. You can make up your own marking so that they make more sense to you. I highly recommend utilizing highlighters and color coding them, as it's much better for your eyes. So evaluation and critical analysis framework. So as we can see here, we have a nice framework here where we have the full citation, the scope, purpose, and method, the claims, qualifiers, evidence, and reasons. This is going to give us a nice way to kind of read through the text and make and keep the notes as we go along. So after we've read through a text, it is going to be useful for us to separate out our notes that we've just marked up. And you should also keep a reference of the source. And this template that we show here provides a nice structure for making notes after reading an article or paper. This framework should be used for each separate item that you are reviewing. The number of rows in the second half of this template are no indication of how many rows you actually may need. That's all going to depend on the item itself. Synthesizing research. So once each item has been analyzed, or the analysis progresses, you are in a position to formulate a theoretical framework for your own investigation. Of course, this framework would have been growing each additional item was analyzed. Innovative frameworks usually draw on literature from more than one core discipline of study, and it is often necessary to extend the boundaries of your own review in order to introduce new concepts. Here we see various strands of the literature that provide the necessary background of identifiers, the gaps in the knowledge that exist. These various strands are linked together to provide a framework that covers all the aspects seen as a relevant initialized question. Information and informed methodologies. The literature review informs you of the state of knowledge of the subject and provides you with the insight concerning that methodology. It is natural to conduct a review of subject-specific literature and apply this framework to establish the theoretical framework of your research for some point of view of the subject. This is potentially a waste of valuable information. The literature review not only informs you of the state of knowledge of the subject, but it also provides you with insights concerning methodology. When any research is presented in a published form, there will be inevitably be a description of the research design applied to that study. Use this to assist you in designing your own investigation, extracting ideas of how not to do it, as well as ideas of how to do it. In formal research reports, this will be written up as a separate section discussing only methodology, but your discoveries from the critical analysis can be applied against to discuss and justify your own research design. Although research methods and texts are written as a guide to research activity, you should also learn from the experience of the researchers and use their designs to inform yours. The review. Return to your purpose. We need to establish context, demonstrate knowledge, and identify gaps. So before we begin writing our review, we must return to our own purpose. When we are writing a literature review to establish the context of our own research, we need to also demonstrate our knowledge of our chosen topic and to identify any gaps that may exist in the published literature. Essentially, this means that we are justifying the need for and contextualizing our research. We also need to develop our own conceptual bridges and start to point out the empirical investigation that we are going to undertake. The review will consist of the following sections: the introduction, the methodology, the discussion, the conclusion, and the references. Now, the introduction should include a clear statement of our purpose, outlining the scope and coverage of our review so that our reader knows what to expect and understands the reason for any apparent omissions. Go back to the earliest sections where we were discussing how to establish the scope of our literature search. Provide our readers with the reasons for our choices that we made at this point. This is going to be the opening section, and it will say that we have reviewed it and why. The methodology we may want to let our readers know how we engaged in the review process. This is not always included in a review. It depends on the nature of the report that we're going to be presenting. The discussion is the main body of the review, where we discuss the collection of items reviewed and put forward our own argument. It is likely that we will want to arrange this discussion under headings that reflect the individual concepts we have used to synthesize our findings. In order to check that we have written an evaluative and critical review that is robust, why not apply the critical analysis technique to our own work at this point? Conclusion. This is your closing statement. There should be nothing new here as you have already provided your argument. This is a clear and concise statement of the argument based on the evidence that you provided in the discussion, and the conclusion should end with a statement of the problem or research questions that will still remain after all you already know that has been investigated. The references. The referencing for a literature review should be a very high standard. The list of references is as much a part of the review as it is for the discussion, and it should be treated as such. Summary. The literature review process is the continuous one throughout the lifespan of any project. There will be a point in which our individual critical analysis of items will be synthesized, but we should not stop there. We must add to the review each time that we find and locate out a relevant piece of work that has a place in our theoretical framework. What we will begin with is an idea of our research, a particular curiosity that needs to be formalized and placed within the current knowledge surrounding that idea. From our review, we can then move on to the next stage in the research process, framing our research question, aims, and objectives, or hypothesis based on what we have discovered within the published literature. If you guys like this, please comment, subscribe, and hit that like button, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.